Good wishes to all. Chapter 3, Western Moral Thinkers. Socrates. Historical background. For understanding the trends of ancient Greek moral philosophy, especially the departure which Socratic doctrines represent, it is necessary to begin with Sophism. Actually, sophists gave a practical turn to Greek philosophy. The Greek philosophy began as speculation into the nature of the cosmos or universe and into the ultimate principle of all things. As is to be expected, the early speculations on the subject could make little headway, and this led to skepticism about abstract philosophical thinking. Around this time, the contacts of Greeks with the rest of the world began and changed their outlook. Earlier, Greeks believed that their morals and ideals are not merely the conventions of their own society, but are rooted in natural order. Their morals are not subjective views of a particular society, but are objective and universal. The Greek thinkers began to wonder whether various national and local ways of life, customs, religions, and moral codes which their contacts with outside world revealed are conventions or naturally given. They began to doubt the earlier view that Greek culture and morals are ideal and rooted in nature. Greek morality no longer seemed ideal or unique. Morals, it seemed, are neither universal nor absolute but are related to a given society. As we shall see, Socrates opposed this sort of moral relativism. Further, Sophists, unlike the earlier Greek philosophers, had no interest in discovering objective truth about the external world. They were practical teachers. The contemporary Greek city state opened out many opportunities of political advancement to talented youth. But for this purpose, the political aspirants had to cultivate skills of clever oratory for swaying the masses. An avenue of making money in ancient Greece was through arguing in lawsuits, which also presupposed oratorical skills. Sophists were itinerant professors who traveled from city to city and gave instruction to young men. They taught, uh, they taught them grammar, interpretation of poets, the philosophy of mythology and religion, etc. Their main focus was, however, on rhetoric or on representation of arguments in attractive and pleasing grab. This earned them a bad name. It seemed that sophists taught the art of making the unjust appear the just cause. They also taught so people felt how to win lawsuits by hook or crook and how best to advance one's political career. More importantly, sophists put man at the center of their doctrines. Protagoras, the most renowned sophist, expresses this view in the following beautiful passage. Man is the measure of all things, of those that are, that they are, of those that are not, that they are not. This may mean that the community, society, or the whole of humanity is the standard or criterion of truth. However, Protagoras regarded moral judgments or valuations as relative. For I hold that whatever practices seem right and laudable to any particular state are so for that state, so long as it holds by them. Socrates believed that moral judgments and standards are objective and universal. This is the reason why Socrates discusses moral concepts such as truth, courage, and justice at great length. For sophists seem to advocate extreme relativism. What appears to you to be true is true for you, and what appears to me true to me is true for me. This is pure subjectivism. However, many modern philosophers feel that the ancient moral thinkers criticized our sophists too harshly. With this background, we turn to Socrates. Socrates as the first systematic moral thinker. Socrates is the first systematic moral thinker in Western philosophical tradition. He belonged to the Athenian Republic in ancient Greece. Early on, Athens was a city state but gradually became an empire. Socrates lived in the 5th century BC, 469 to 399. To understand his ideas, we need to have some historical background of his times. Around this period, there were wars between Persians and Greeks. The Greeks won a notable victory at Marathon in the First Persian War. In the victories over Persia, Sparta, a city state and rival of Athens, played a major role. While the Athenian Republic was a democracy, Sparta was a military oligarchy. oligarchy. Sparta was a military oligarchy. Under Pericles, a democratically minded ruler, Athens proposed and witnessed a great artistic efflorescence. The famous ancient Greek dramatists Schylus, Sophocles, and Euripides belonged to 5th century BC. Incidentally, Aristophanes, a comic poet of this time, lampooned Socrates in the drama Clouds. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta resulted in the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC. Sparta defeated Athens in the war and set up in Athens an oligarchic government known as the 30 tyrants. Some of these tyrants, such as Critias, there had been pupils of Socrates. They were overthrown within a year and democracy was restored. The political atmosphere became poisoned in the wake of war. Plague defeated amidst widespread suspicions about conspiracies and treacheries against government. Trial of Socrates. It was at this time that Socrates fell foul of the political rulers in Athens. He was accused of corrupting the youth and of impiety towards gods. At the end of the trial, Socrates was condemned to death. Plato, a great philosopher and disciple of Socrates, gives a poignant account of the trial in the Apology. It is a great Platonic dialogue. In those times, philosophers used to write their treatises in the form of dramatic dialogues among the participants. Philosophers have gleaned the moral doctrines of Socrates mainly from various dialogues, which Plato wrote. Some of the famous Platonic dialogues, besides Apology, are Republic, Phaedo, Protagoras, Meno, and Gorgias. Many philosophers think that the Socrates portrayed by Plato in his dialogues may not be historical but fictional. We can bypass this question and proceed straight to a few important details of Socrates' personality and then outline his moral theories. Socrates was a man of modest means. In his younger days, he served in the army and acquitted himself with courage and honor. He then settled down in Athens. He spent his time in disputation and taught philosophy to the young without charging fees. He carried on his discussion in marketplaces and other public forums. He was high minded and was indifferent to worldly success. He was a saintly character with a beautiful soul. Far from being an armchair moral thinker, Socrates practiced what he preached. His trial and death have created a halo of moral heroism around him. He has been put on the same pedestal as Jesus, Galileo, and Sir Thomas More. In his tract on liberty, Mill wrote, "Mankind can hardly be too often reminded that there was once a man named Socrates, between whom and the legal authorities of his time there took place a memorable collision. In modern terminology, Socrates would be called an anti establishment thinker. Moral concerns of Socrates. The philosophical the philosophic interests of Socrates, unlike those of his predecessors, were ethical rather than scientific. He turned away from cosmic speculations and brought philosophy down from heaven to earth. He focused on human relations of life and on the various ways in which men in their different role interact with one another. He thought that these alone lie within the compass of knowledge and are capable of yielding lessons for proper conduct of life. He was a practical moralist in this sense. According to Socrates, ethics has an end or a standard. The precepts or means of achieving the end flow from ethical theory. But he did not precisely state what it is. The Greek philosophers developed the concept of the summum bonum at the later time. Summum bonum is the highest good or the ultimate good according to which values and priorities are establishing in an ethical system. Socrates and Plato refer to the final end of conduct as the art of dealing with human beings, the art of behaving in society, and the science of human happiness. Socrates puts moral considerations above all else. The only worthwhile pursuit for men is virtue the noble and the praiseworthy. Doing well consists in excelling in whatever one does. Knowledge is a prerequisite for good behavior. He preferred the pleasures of self improvement and of duty as opposite to indulgences, honors, and worldly advancement. In Apology, he reproaches men for pursuing wealth and glory more than wisdom and virtue. The soul can be perfected by acquiring virtues. In modern terminology, for Socrates, virtue is the highest psychological good and is always to be preferred to material good. Life is not worthy living if soul is destroyed, and worth doing corrodes it. Unjust acts signify improper behavior towards others. To quote his examples, it is unjust to rob temples, betray friends, steal, break oaths, commit adultery, and mistreat parents. Socrates opposed wrongdoing even when his life was at stake. His friends arranged for his escape from prison so that he can evade the death penalty. Socrates declined their offer, saying that it would be unjust to do so. He said that we should not act wrongly or unjustly, even when others are unjust to us. As we saw before, Socrates shows admirable moral heroism by refusing to abandon his principles and by refusing to escape death through immoral means. Socrates holds that no one knowingly does what is bad. This view is known as moral intellectualism. It means that only knowledge is needed to make all men virtuous. Socrates thinks that men desire what is virtuous or good for them. If they desire bad things or act wrongly, it is due to their ignorance. In this conception, virtue is knowledge and ensure good action. Further, virtue is sufficient for happiness. It is noteworthy that in Christian, as in Hindu ethics, a pure heart, not necessarily knowledge, leads to virtuous action and can be found both among the ignorant and the learned. Common experience shows that men often crave for things which they know are bad and pursue activities which they know are harmful. They drive recklessly or take drugs. Even saints, not to speak of ordinary mortals, succumb to worldly temptations. Moral knowledge by itself is inadequate to motivate men to be virtuous or follow the right course of action in a given situation. Hence, the Socratic conception is rather simplistic. Men often annoyingly and are unable to resist temptations. This is what the saying, the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, means. The Socrates has overlooked the complexities of moral psychology. Aristotle criticized the moral intellectualism of Socrates or the view that virtue is a kind of knowledge. Aristotle believes that the essence of moral life consists in cultivation of good habits. The two views can in fact be reconciled. Virtue involves both knowledge and habit. Virtue is, in fact, a perspective. The virtuous man lives continuously in a moral universe or simply follows moral duty. To live continuously in a moral universe is a habit, but simultaneously it is a form of insight. The man who lives in a different universe sees things habitually in a different way through a differently colored glass. To be virtuous, therefore, is to possess habitually a certain kind of knowledge or insight. Virtue is both a kind of knowledge and a kind of habit. Habit, as applied to moral character, is not mere custom. It is not comparable to habits such as one's walking or speaking style. Habits of moral significance are habits of deliberate choice, as deliberate choice depends on thought or reason. In order to choose the right, we must know the right. Thus, knowledge and habit both go into virtuous conduct. Moderate living. Socrates advocates mild asceticism. A philosopher need not give up all ordinary pleasures, but he should not be a slave to them. He must be entirely concerned with the soul and not with the body. He would like, as far as he can, to get away from the body and to turn to the soul. Philosopher Socrates continues, try to disavow the soul from communion with the body, whereas other people think that life is not worthy living for a man who has no sense of pleasure and no part in bodily pleasure. We also find in Socrates the religious ideas which devalue body and look upon it as an impediment to spiritual progress. Its body needs to food and is prone to disease. It fills us full of loves and lusts and fears and fancies of all kinds, and endless foolery, and in fact, as men say, takes away from us all power of thinking at all. Mental purity means freedom from slavery to the body and its needs. Socrates also thought that body is a hindrance to the acquisition of knowledge and that sight and hearing are inaccurate witnesses to true existence. If revealed to the soul at all, is revealed in thought, not in sense. The link between morality and theology was tenons is in Socrates' thought. Theology consists of study of philosophical and moral doctrines of a religion. Systematic religious thinking, as for example in Judaism, Christianity, or Buddhism, did not exist in ancient Greece. Early Christian writers referred to Greek religious ideas as paganism. However, Christian writers were greatly influenced by Plato and Aristotle. Greeks worshipped many gods. Socrates was pious and reverential towards gods. So far as the gods administered the world in a right spirit, they would show favor to the virtuous. Socratic method. Socrates was a reflective moralist who analyzed the moral categories, then emerging into contemporary discourse. Platonic dialogues are discussions of definitions of ethical terms such as temperance or moderation, friendship, courage. Socrates consistently maintains that he knows nothing and is only wiser than others is knowing that he knows nothing. His method of discussion consisted in putting a series of questions to others and in the process exposing their pretensions to knowledge. This could be the reason for the hostility which he provoked. In this connection, the following incident, which Bertrand Russell cites, is instructive. He would ask such questions as, if I wanted a shoe mended, whom I should employ? To which some ingenious youth would answer, a shoemaker, O Socrates. He would go on to the carpenters, coppersmiths, etc., and finally ask some such questions as, who should mend the ship of state? When he fell into conflict with the 30 tyrants, Gracia, the chief who knew his ways from having studied under him, forbade him to continue teaching the young and added, you had better be done with your shoemakers, carpenters, and coppersmiths. These must be pretty well trodden out at heel by this time, considering the circulation you have given them. Other aspects of Socratic thought. We need to consider only a few more aspects of Socratic models. In one interpretation, the trial of Socrates is seen as a conflict between state power on one side and individual liberty and freedom of speech on the other. Whatever may be the status of contemporaneous law, the question arises about whether an individual can somehow put his own sense of conscience or moral integrity even above the law. This is a perennial question in political theory. Even today, we have many activists who try to act as self appointed conscience keepers of the nation. They are often active on issues such as Naxalism, minority rights, secularism, tribal rights, and environment. They also espouse the human rights of those accused of terrorism. In these matters, the question of balancing security threats to nation and human individual liberties becomes important. During his trial, Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living. It means that a worthy life is possible only if we continually reflect on our thinking and remove contradictions and incoherence from it. This is a typical intellectual conception, perhaps inapplicable to common people, but it reflects the sublime quality of Socratic thought. We refer to an interpretation of the trial of Socrates as a conflict between state or political power and freedom of speech. In another interpretation, it can be seen as the result of Socrates' highly individual quest for self perfection. We may also note that Socrates has given a new direction to the then prevalent moral values. Greek epic poets, Homer and Hesiod, set out certain exemplary models of heroic virtue and civic life. The virtues of this tradition were the virtues of a warrior culture, of warlike peoples and men at war. This conception of the citizen contained certain notions of citizen loyalty and patriotism which were created and shaped by the poetic tradition going back to Homer. Socrates has replaced the traditional view of morality. Socratic conception of citizenship emphasizes the individual's own powers of independent reason, argument, and judgment. The Socratic citizen is unlikely to defer to or rely on such public goods as custom, authority, and tradition. Many centuries had to pass before the emergence of the modern state and its free citizens. Moral thought also went through many turns and twists over his long period. However, if we make due allowances for modern trends and tastes, the moral reaching of Socrates still holds its ground. The rigorous analysis of moral ideas which Socrates pioneered is a producer which modern philosophy still follows. Conceptual analysis and clarification of ideas are parts of current philosophical practice. Modern philosophers adopt a positivist approach to morals which implies that they analyze but rarely commit themselves to a given moral code. Summary of Socrates' philosophy. Socrates was the first systematic moral thinker. He led an exemplary life, spending most of his time in philosophical discussion. He was accused of corrupting the youth and of impiety towards gods. At the end of the trial, Socrates was condemned to death. His trial and death have created a halo of moral heroism around him. Political activists like Henry David Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King was inspired by him. His pupil Plato, a great philosopher, outlined many Socratic ideas in the famous dialogues Apology, Republic, Phaedo, Protagoras, Meno, and Gorgias. The philosophical interests of Socrates, unlike those of his predecessors, were ethical rather than scientific. He did not speculate on the origin and nature of the universe. According to Socrates, the only worthwhile pursuit for men is virtue, the noble and the praiseworthy. Unjust acts signify improper behavior towards others. Socrates hold that no one knowingly does what is bad. This view is known as moral intellectualism. But this runs counter to the fact that men often err knowingly and are unable to resist temptations. Socrates advocates mild asceticism. Socrates was a reflective moralist who analyzed the moral categories then emerging into contemporary discourse. Platonic dialogues are discussions of definitions of ethical terms such as temperance or moderation, friendship, courage. Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates had given a new direction to the then prevalent moral values. He shifted attention from heroic virtues. His conception of citizenship emphasized the individual's own powers of independent reasoning, argument, and judgment. Thank you. Plato argues that since philosophers have an insight into forms or reality, they should be the rulers of a state, or that alternatively, rulers should become philosophers. Bertrand Russell looks from a different perspective the problem of continuous change in nature which bothered Greek philosophers. They felt that it prevents men from gaining certain knowledge. According to Russell, the problem which puzzled the Greek philosophers relates to universals or general terms used in language. Examples of general terms are roses, tables, chairs, and the like. In modern language, these terms are concepts and the objects which fall within the definition of any concept are assigned to it. There may be any number of instances of the concept rose. Some philosophers believe that there is a form or essence underlying all such instances of a concept. They are called realists. Their opponents are normalists who argue that one need not look beyond the individual instances of rose. Idea of good. After this brief outline of the theory of forms, we turn to Plato's moral ideas. For Plato, the good has unconditional worth and is the source of worth in various things. He gives a sublime philosophical definitions of the good. It is the ultimate ground at the same time of knowing and of being, of the perceiver and the perceived, of the subject and the objective, of the ideal and the real. Though exalted itself above such a division, Plato regarded the idea of the good and God is as identical. Plato considered the good from three sides. First, he considered the good as idea or good in itself as mentioned above. In this aspect, it is distinct from its manifestations in science, truth, beauty, and virtue. Secondly, he considers the good as individual virtue. Thirdly, he regards the good as ethical world in the political state. We will shortly consider the constitution which Plato outlines in the Republic. Any discussion of the highest good has to consider the conception of pleasure. The doctrine of hedonism proposed that pleasure is the true good. Plato rejects hedonism because pleasures are intermediate and relative. For the pursuit of a pure pleasures often results in pain and misery. Plato, however, admits pleasure as an ingredient of the good by showing the necessary connection between virtue and true pleasure. True and enduring pleasure is found in the exercise of reasons and in the possessions of truth and goodness. Good life is virtuous life, largely made up of intellectual studies and rational action, accompanied by some pure aesthetic pleasures. Plato's conception of pleasure is thus spiritual and intellectual. Theory of virtue. Plato's theory of virtue follows the Socratic doctrine. He identifies virtue with knowledge. From this, it follows that virtue is teachable and that man can learn morality just as they can learn any other subject. Morality is not an innate quality or a contingent gift of nature. Moral beings are not born but made through education. Plato makes a fourfold division of morals and associates them with different parts of the soul. The four virtues are wisdom or prudence, valor, temperance, and justice. Plato regards the virtues as forming a complex unity. The one can be manifold or the manifold one. This may seem like philosophical word play, but implies that virtues share common features and look similar from several perspectives. Plato accords a privileged position to justice as the overarching virtue. Plato divides the soul into three parts: rational, spirited, and appetitive. Wisdom or prudence is virtue of reason, the first part of the soul. Wisdom is the directing or measuring virtue. For instance, without it, courage will become a rash impulse, and quiet endurance will degenerate into stony indifference. Valor is the virtue of spirit, the second part of the soul. Valor preserves the rational intelligence which is often beset with anxieties in its struggle against pain and pleasure, desire and fear. The third part of the soul consists of biological appetites. It is necessary to control their propensity towards excess. Temperance regulates human passions and signifies the submission of non rational elements to reason. Justice refers to the harmonious functioning of the related elements of the soul, the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. Justice in Plato's sense makes an individual concentrate on his duties. It can be thought of as the sense of duty. As we shall see in the ideal commonwealth of Plato, every citizen will perform his assigned duties without craving for the more attractive or powerful roles of others. Plato's Republic. As mentioned earlier, Plato considered that individual virtue is possible only for citizens of a moral state. Plato's dialogue Republic is a vision of such an ideal political society or commonwealth. It is the earliest political utopia. Plato proposes a constitution in which philosophers will be the kings or rulers. He holds that until philosophers are made kings or kings or princes acquire philosophical wisdom, no solutions can be found for the political ills of states. Prima facie, Plato's suggestion of handing over state power to speculative philosophers sounds strange. Political thinkers have identified the reasons which led Plato to his vision of the ideal commonwealth. He was reacting against the troubled political conditions in Athens after its defeat in the Peloponnesian War. In modern terminology, Athens then was a failed state. The capital penalty imposed on Socrates would have exacerbated Plato's dislike for democracy, which had then degenerated into mob rule. Being an aristocrat, Plato had a natural antipathy towards democracy. Most importantly, Plato was impressed by the myth of Sparta. Sparta was a military autocracy controlled by an oligarchy. oligarchy. Plutarch, in his Life of Lycurgus, gave a glowing, romantic, and fictional account of the Spartan state and created the myth of Sparta, which impressed Plato. The Republic contains many features of the Spartan state which Plutarch narrated. The citizens of the Republic are to be divided into three classes: the common people, the soldiers, and the guardians. Only the guardians are to exercise political power. The legislator or the author of the constitution will select the first group of guardians. Afterward, the guardians will succeed by hereditary. The main problem is to ensure that guardians will follow the intentions of the legislator. To secure this end, Plato proposes a series of political, economic, educational, and other measures. As acquisitive instincts and family ties lead to corruption, the republic will have neither private property nor the family system. There will be community living and common eating. Women and children will be commonly shared. Children will be taken away from parents at a certain age and will be raised by the state. Weak and informed children will be exposed to death at birth. Plato gives extensive details about the proper type of education. Education will consist of culture and athletics, gymnastics. There will be austere training of the body. Both boys and girls will participate in physical training. Girls will also be trained in all military arts and will be conditioned to be brave. The education will inculcate gravity, decorum, and courage. The education, it is evident, is a form of rigorous military training. Plato proposes strict censorship over literature, drama, and music. Even Homer, who attributes immoral behavior to gods, is to be banned. Tragic dramas with their pathos, which may undermine courage, and military, which are to be banned. Cheap comedy, pantomime, and buffoonery will find no place in the Republic. Plato is severe on poets too. Military music, which serves to embolden soldiers and the general populace, will be encouraged. Plato doubts whether people will readily accept his proposed state. He hopes that people can be convinced through one royal lie. It will consist in propounding and propagating the myth that God has created men of three kinds: rulers, guardians, military class, and the common citizen. If people accept the inequalities and the class system as part of a divinely ordained order, there will be no dissatisfaction or social unrest. The republic will enjoy political stability. Plato explains his second conception of justice after describing the three classes of the ideal commonwealth. The wisdom of the state resides in the small class of guardians. The courage of the state in the auxiliaries and the temperance of the state in the subordination of the governed to the governing. The justice of the state consists in that everyone attends to his business without interfering with anyone else. The individual is just when all the parts of his soul function harmoniously with the due subordination of lower parts to the higher parts. Similarly, the state is just when all its classes and their individual members perform their due functions diligently. Political injustice, on the other hand, exists in a meddlesome and restless spirit, which leads to one class interfering with the business of the other. As Bertrand Russell's observes humorously that everyone should mind his own business in an admirable dictum. But it hardly fits into modern concept of justice based on equity, impartiality, and fair play. Criticisms of Platonic ideas. For many centuries, philosophers lavished fulsome praise on Plato's Republic. It was seen as an odyssey of the free intellect, a sublime expression of political ideals freed from narrow personal interests of the individual. Although the then Athenian state was in utter moral decline, Plato seemed to have expressed its form or its true but deeply buried, buried moral foundations. It was recognized that the political institutions of the republic subordinate the individual to the political society, but it was considered a necessary corrective to unchecked individual licentiousness. The violations of the individual and requirements of state power have to be reconciled to ensure political stability. In modern times, political thinkers have attacked Plato's ideas. They are seen as offensive to the modern democratic tempo. Bertrand Russell stresses the ancestry of fascism to Plato. Karl Popper includes Plato among the three great intellectual enemies of open society, the other two being Hegel and Marx. Open society, according to Popper, is representative democracy with a full panoply of individual freedoms. We may note the main charges which modern writers level against Plato. In spite of Plato's fine talk, his republic is a hereditary military oligarchy. It is essentially based not on democratic but on aristocratic principles. Political power vests with the guardians. A large section of the population, farmers, artisans, and traders, will be permanently excluded from political power. This will be a permanent dispensation with no possibility of change. Plato's Republic seems to reflect his subconscious aristocratic wish that the democratic tendencies should be stifled. It may appear that the republic will be ruled by saintly guardians embodied, imbued with Platonic ideals. As ideals represent impersonal ethics, there may seem no great objection to rule of the enlightened philosophers. It may seem preferable to the messy democratic system often driven by venal greed and power lust of politics. The difficulty is that there may be no unanimity, unanimity or consensus on even the most enlightened ideology. Ideology expresses the desires, hopes, and the world view of a social group. There can be conflicting ideologies. The second half of the 20th century is a tale of the conflict between Western capitalism and communism. There can be clash on morality, for instance, as between that of a Christian saint and of Nazi Superman. Ideals cannot be often disassociated from the class, status, or nation of an individual. The ideology of the guardians will have no relation to popular desires or hopes. At best, guardians will implement Plato's ideals. Plato's concept of justice, unlike modern democratic theory, has no connection with equality. Justice implies that citizens accept their status as guardians, soldiers, farmers, artisans, or traders, and perform their assigned roles. This conception allows inequalities of power and privileges to exist without the injustice. Plato sees no injustice in the rule of hereditary guardians since they are best fitted to rule because of their knowledge and training. Plato's view on this question is misconceived. In society, certain occupations like Those of doctors, lawyers, navigators, and accountants require acquisitions of professional skills, but those who seek political office need no such qualification. The common denominator of citizenship is sufficient for aspiring political leaders. Plato's view in this matter rests on a false analogy. Plato argues that the guardian possesses the knowledge of moral ideas of the abstract realm, leaving aside the question whether such an ideal realm in fact exists. We need to note another difficulty with Plato's conception. Plato and for a long time many philosophers mixed up factual statements and moral judgments. Factual statements are verifiable and objective. They are about events or features of the world whose veracity can be directly or indirectly checked. For example, experimental data are statements of fact. Knowledge of the physics world largely consists of factual statements of science. Moral judgments and theories with which Plato is concerned are distinct from facts. We will discuss the nature of moral judgments later, but it is easy to see that morals are not directly linked to an objective external reality. They are essentially about desirable human conduct and ways of living. While there can be agreement in principle about facts exist true or false, it is not so with morals. As we have noted, people disagree about morals which ultimately depend on one's ideals, preferences, and ends. In a sense, morals cannot be equated with knowledge. In modern terminology, one has to distinguish between judgments of facts and judgments of value. Agreement on facts rests on standard verification procedures. Moral agreements are matters of consensus. We may note a few more unattractive features of Plato's Republic. It smacks of totalitarian and autocratic rule. Plato is ready to use the royal light to deceive the gullible population. He introduces censorship, which is against the principle of liberty. His proposals for abolishing family system are weird. He virtually abolishes the private moral space of the individual. He experiences his activities and pleasures not as an autonomous individual but as a part of the social organism. He is submerged in the state. As we noted earlier, Plato's views on virtue are derived from Socrates. He places them within the framework of his theory of forms. As a result, he injects an air of mysticism into them. Plato conceives an individual's moral life as dependent on the ethical constitution of the state. Hence, any discussion of Platonic virtue cannot be separated from political ethics. Plato is generally seen more as a political thinker than as a moralist. His ideal political commonwealth is an outgrowth of his disenchantment with democracy and common populace, the great unwashed in the words of a political philosopher, and his desire to ensure the continued existence of an aristocratic state. Notwithstanding the glittering phrases he uses, his ideal commonwealth is essentially a closed military aristocratic oligarchy. It contains features characteristic of modern dictatorships. As such, the Platonic political temper runs counter to modern liberal political thought. However, his account of individual virtue is still an inspiring ideal. Summary of Plato's philosophy. Plato's philosophical outlook was greatly influenced by the defeat of Athens in the Peloponnesian War and the death sentence on Socrates. His views became anti democratic. Plato regards the external world as given in senses as only an appearance. The real world is an abstract realm of eternal and unchanging ideas or forms. Plato calls the forms as archetypes and the objects of the material world as their copies or adumbrations. For Plato, the goods has unconditional worth and is the source of worth in various things. Plato rejects hedonism because pleasures are indeterminate and relative. Plato makes a fourfold division of morals and associates them with different parts of the soul. The four virtues are wisdom or prudence, valor, temperance, and justice. Plato divides soul into three parts as rational, spirited, and appetitive. He associates different virtues with each part of the soul. He injects an air of mysticism into moral discussions. Justice refers to the harmonious functioning of the related elements of the soul, the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. Plato's dialogue, the Republic, is a vision of an ideal political society or commonwealth. It is the earliest political utopia. Plato proposes a constitution in which philosophers will be the kings or rulers. Plutarch, in his life of Lycurgus, gave a glowing, romantic, and fictional account of the Spartan state and created the myth of Sparta, which impressed Plato. Sparta was a military dictatorship. The citizens of the republic are to be divided into three classes: the common people, the soldiers, and the guardians. Only the guardians are to exercise political power. The republic will have neither private property nor family system. Guardians will be hereditary and will be educated with rigid discipline for instilling in them military skills and culture. Plato proposes strict censorship of literature, drama, and music. His republic is a hereditary military oligarchy. It smacks of totalitarian and autocratic rule. In it, the individual will be submerged in the state. In modern times, political thinkers have attacked Plato's ideas. They are seen as offense to the modern democratic temper. Bertrand Russell stresses the ancestry of fascism to Plato. Karl Popper includes Plato among the three great intellectual enemies of open society. The other two being Hegel and Marx. The ideology of the guardians will have no relation to popular desires or hopes. At best, guardians will implement Plato's ideals. The individual is submerged in the state. Thank you.